in this anti-DE&I space. It's affecting all of us, whether you're an elected official, like most of the people in the room, whether you are a nonprofit worker, a corporate worker, everyone's losing funding. Everyone is having to rapid response, organize and mobilize around these executive orders and these shifts in policy. And it has everyone scrambling. And I hope that what we can do is kind of reset, remind the room that what is happening right now is not necessarily unprecedented. That doesn't make it not harmful. That doesn't make it not dangerous, but it's not necessarily unprecedented. And what can we learn from those who have been doing this work, and the organizers and the researchers and the leaders on the ground, so that we can meet this moment head on. So I'm really grateful. But before we dig into that conversation, I want to give each of you a chance to tell us a little bit more about yourselves besides the quick introductions that I just gave. So please take a little time, brag on yourselves, let them know why you up on this stage, what you do, how you do it better than anybody else, and what we're going to learn from you.
Well, my name is Dewana Thompson, and I'm the founder of Woke Vote. I'm also the partner in Black Equity Strategies and Trust. And I will tell you that I could go into a litany of why I deserve to be on this stage, but honestly, with what we are all fighting right now, it doesn't even matter. It is time out for titles. It is time out for all of the hiding behind sort of the glitter and the glam of what we do, and to just realize that it's time for radical collaboration. And what that means is that there are individuals out here who feel like they can push us back because they have a position that, individually someone has told them that you hold more power than the people. In my organization, Woke Vote, we consistently demand that our people realize that they have more power than those who are in position. It is their responsibility to push those in position to get us what we need. And the reason why I think that's important is because right now, what we see, there's a brilliant quote that I love, and it says that disorganized truth will be beat by an organized lie. Disorganized truth will be beat by an organized lie. And that is what we are up against right now. People who think that executive orders are already, in place. They are being told that, and the fear from those things are causing them to respond a certain kind of way. And so we have to be the organized truth so that we can ensure that individuals understand what their power is in this moment, what our position is in this moment to move each other forward, and that we can't do any of those things alone.
Y'all, it is so hard to follow that. Let me just say, I'm so excited to be here with you all. So I am a researcher at Oxfam, which is a global organization whose goal is to fight poverty and inequality, which is a huge, huge task. But my focus in particular is really looking at what do those things mean within the context of the United States. And that means a lot of different things. But right now and for today, the goal of this conversation is really to think through the data that we have and the policies that we can focus on to really make change at the local and the national level. And so I love what Tawana was saying, and putting titles aside, one of the things that I love about my job is the ability to bring information into communities, to educate folks so that they can also advocate for themselves and feel empowered to make change in their own communities. So it's so exciting to be here and speaking to young elected officials. Y'all know what the work is, and I hope to just offer myself and my organization as a resource in this work as we continue to push it forward.
Yes. Well, let's dig into this. I think some of this has already been framed in the previous fireside chat, but I want us to spend even more time on this, especially with these. What I love is how we're going to be able to marry your two experiences with community organizing and having an ear to the ground and a foot on the ground, but also the data doesn't lie. Right, the numbers don't lie, and seeing what is said. And there's this quote by, and I'm gonna say a bunch of quotes because I just feel like there's a lot of brilliance in the room. But there's a brilliant organizer named Derek Purnell who said the greatest threats to our liberation are helplessness, hopelessness, and the criminalization of rebellion. That's right. And I think we're in that space right now, where if people feel helpless and hopeless, and they know that there's going to be this organized, criminalized response to their rebellion, it is easy to succumb to whatever misinformation you see and say, I don't want to be the one to find out that it's true. I don't want to be the one to rock the boat and be the one standing out there alone. So we have to name these threats so that people understand what we're up against. What is a boogeyman? What is a real threat? What is, we have to be able to parse out the truth from facts. So let's lay out, what are the biggest and most urgent threats, according to you both, what you're hearing and seeing when it comes to our human and civil rights, whether that be Black and brown communities, LGBTQ communities, working class and poor? Like, what are those threats that we are enduring in this moment that you're seeing right now that are real threats, not the fake news?
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to jump in. So I'm gonna make it a little bit nerdy, and then we can get into the sort of community space. So one of the threats that we are seeing is the fact that data is rapidly disappearing. We're looking specifically at data from the Census Bureau. We're looking at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the spaces where I get my own data to sort of bring information into the communities and to explain what it is we're seeing, which communities are impacted, why it matters. If we don't have access to that data, it's much harder to tell that story. And I think uplifting the stories of individuals, their individual narrative, is so crucial. But the power comes when you take massive amounts of data that's at the national level, or even at the state or at the county or at the local level, and you pair it with the voice of a person who can tell you what this means in practice. And so when we don't have the massive data to back up what we're seeing, and we're relying on the stories of individuals, oftentimes people attack those individual stories, and they feel more empowered to say, well, this one person is wrong, as opposed to saying, oh, actually, we have millions of data points all over the United States. We have the census to back it up. This is federal information. We have this information. It's not just one quote. So when we're seeing that disappear, it's a real problem.
I love that, because a couple of things. One, in marginalized communities like the South, where I come from, data is already an issue for those communities, because data sometimes shows up with those inherent biases already. And so because there's already a gap in the way data tracks and communicates the narratives on behalf of marginalized communities, this threat right now is so critical, because not only is it erasing our opportunity to say why, it's erasing our opportunity to say who, right? And when you erase the who, then they can actually start to say, this isn't a thing. Because there's no person, they're not associating with a person, they're not associating with data. So we definitely have to figure out, and this is why we talk a lot about owning our own data and ensuring that we are trusted in our communities enough that when we say we need your response on something, we need to understand where you are, what resources you have, what your experiences have been, and we have a way to protect that data, that it allows us to make sure that we still can support opportunities and organizations like hers with data that we know is true and that it is rooted in something that is not displacing or dismissing or diminishing our communities. The second thing I would say that would probably lean into this question is that one of the real life threats is the impact on jobs, right? The fact of the matter is the amount of people who are actually losing their jobs in marginalized communities based off of policy shifts right now is it's overwhelming, right? I do not wake up one day in this 100-day period that we've been in that I haven't been told multiple people that I personally know have been impacted. And so that's not a perceived threat, that's a real threat. And there aren't jobs to add them to. Right? And so when we're thinking about, and I've worked on every single level of government. I got my start in municipal government, which is what I still to this day feel like is my favorite leg of government. I feel like it's the most immediate and the most responsive. But when you talk about the local level government, they are literally our first line of defense right now. And so asking them, what is the plan for creating more jobs? What is the plan for reimagining? I told somebody, I'm going back to school to be a plumber. Because those critical roles right now are the roles that we need to be reminding people, number one, are necessary, right? But number two, we got to all put our hands back to understanding how to get what we need as a community. I'm going back to be a plumber, a mechanic, HVAC, all the different things that we need. And it's helping our communities to know that these roles, number one, are respectful, right? And that we need them, and helping people to reimagine what's possible. So creating these these processes for individuals to go back and get those trade jobs, and reminding them that those jobs are powerful and they help position us in community.
Yes, that's such a good point. That's such a good point. And that's something we've even been dealing with even beyond this anti-DNA stage with automation and AI. But it has only been exacerbated. And to your point, and a point that was made earlier, it's going to create even more urgency, because now you have so many people descending upon the same jobs. The job market is oversaturated, as they say. But then that's going to create more housing issues, more public safety issues, more need for direct services, as those direct services are being underfunded and defunded. And so this is all real. And so I want to speak to how the things that you both named, especially the erasure and absence of data, is leading to policy setbacks. Because as you said, and I think this was such an important point that I just want to underscore, Duana, that when the data is erased, then the people are erased, in essence. It's like, well, if no one's tracking you, then no one knows how you're being harmed, and no one knows how to advocate for you. And so it makes it easier to attack a group of people that is already being undercounted or invisibilized. So what are some of those policy setbacks that we're seeing that are going to just hit differently and harder in an era where we're being undercounted, where people are more financially strapped? Like, what does that look like?
I mean, I can start. I also serve as the chairwoman for the Birmingham Housing Authority, which is the third largest, well, actually the seventh largest in the country and the largest in our state. And what I can tell you is the immediate rollbacks of policies are at HUD and at HHS. And some of the other places that fund public housing, we're seeing in real time people there are housing authorities across the country that aren't even able to provide rent this month because of it, right? And so that's a real policy threat that we're seeing. HBCUs are seeing an immediate threat, and not just HBCUs. Hell, look at what happened with Harvard, right? Look at what's happening just with the attack on education in general. We're seeing it with Head Start being rolled back in a lot of our cities. We're seeing, so these are real policies and real resources that are already being rolled back because of what's happening on the Hill. I think the other thing that, we work alongside of medical professionals and lawyers who are being told that, if you talk about DEI in a way of just trying to recruit, that we are going to strip all of your funding for a medical profession, for a hospital, for a teaching facility. And this is directly because of the language and the policies that are coming out of the White House. And so we are certainly seeing, those are real threats that we are seeing right now across the board.
Yeah, and this is a conversation about what's going on in the United States, but because I work for a global anti-poverty organization, I would also be really remiss if we don't talk a little bit for a moment about the fact that USAID funding has been withheld. And the majority of the work that Oxfam does is global. And what we are seeing is that people are quite literally dying. People are losing food. And this is not a partisan issue. We should all really care about the fact that children no longer have medical support. They don't have medicine. People don't have food, and famine is getting worse in a lot of parts of the world. So we're seeing the impact immediately, and it's very, very, very worrisome. And again, this is not a partisan question, and it's not just the executive branch. This is a conversation for the legislative branch as well. So something that we've been really advocating around. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention just briefly, and going back to the conversation a little bit about workers, is we are seeing the attempt at rolling back policies at the local level, and that's become really, really worrisome. There's talk about weakening child labor protections in order to get more children at work, because potentially if we have a smaller workforce of immigrant workers, we got to find someone to take the jobs. And so there are states that are suggesting, well, maybe we should have young people under the age of 18 do it. And we're talking about jobs in meatpacking facilities. We're talking about jobs in agriculture, like farm harvesting, among other jobs, including cleaning jobs, like hotel housekeeping. I mean, it is really, really worrisome. That's something that my research is paying very close attention to. So we need to talk about, I mean, it's so layered, but it's not, when we're talking about these policy rollbacks, we're talking global, we're talking national, we're talking local. And I know that's a huge conversation to have, but I think the bringing so many things and throwing so many policy rollbacks at the same time was, of course, a move to try and get us all a little bit harried. And I think the organizing piece that you were mentioning earlier, Brea, is really, really, really critical.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that really quickly? Because this is important when you talk about the labor component, because the other thing that they're doing is making a case for why they believe we should also re-incriminate those who are formerly incarcerated or currently in the incarceration space, and saying that we need to build more spaces for that labor. And so it's another way to double down on some of these policies that we were already fighting against, but now it's urgency, right, because of what has been created by this policy. And we have to be thoughtful that those who we sometimes don't remember in our advocacy and in our organizing are also being impacted in ways that we may not see because they're not a part of our immediate work. But when we look at the way they're trying to subsidize labor, the way in which they are trying to, when we look at the attack on farmers, right, for instance, a lot of these places, they can barely survive. And so I just know that it leads to criminalization of people. And that is what we're most concerned about, and that hopelessness that you talked about earlier.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. I want us to even because I love that y'all zoomed out, and I want to zoom out even more because this rush towards as the opposition and as fascism rises, this rush towards criminalization and undercounting groups so that you can further take advantage of groups. It's so reminiscent to me. I'm thinking, when's the last time that this country had this rush towards shifting labor and shifting criminalization to create more of a labor force? Oh, when the 13th Amendment was created to abolish slavery. And they said, well, we have to replace one free labor source with another. And I see that happening now. And it's always this backlash to progressive politics winning. Because when there's this progressive win and push, there's this how can we take up more space, and how can we invisibilize a new group of people so that we can then criminalize this group? And so even thinking of on the heels of the Black Lives Matter movement, on the heels of really important work around public safety, now we have private detention centers popping up everywhere, and we have people being kidnapped from college campuses, and we have students and professors and people who are doing things the right way, the legal way, who are still disappearing in the name of safety, but really in the name of these insidious forces. And so what I love about the way that you two are zooming out, though I hate the substance of this conversation, but I do appreciate the ways that you all are connecting these dots, so that, because as you said, the goal is to keep us like that, and when we can make those connections, we can see how one feeds the other. And so I want you both to speak to how we get to this moment and how it doesn't appear out of thin air. I mean, literally, Duana, your organization is called Woke Vote. So before there was an anti-DEI, it was anti-woke and anti-critical race theory and all lives matter and all of the other things. And so this is not a new phenomenon we're in, but they're finding new phrases to latch onto every 2 to 4 years to threaten our work, to undermine our work, and to do it in a way that makes it easier for criminalization and this oligarchy to take space. So can y'all both speak to that trend and how we get here, and how it is not about DEI at all, how it is not about woke at all, how it's not about any of these phrases, but about what systematic thing is at play here?
Well, my background is I'm a historian by training. So I want to take it further back. The systemic removal of communities from policies can be traced to our Constitution, right? And I love, there's a great quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates talking about when the social safety net in this country was created, it was made with gaps just big enough for communities of color to fall through. And so the ways in which policies have been written in the US has always done this. They have sometimes made it explicit and named it, and sometimes they have made it race and gender neutral on its face. And one great example is even federal labor standards. When those were written in the 30s under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, they were written excluding domestic workers, farm workers, and restaurant and tipped workers, which in the 1930s, especially in the South, were Black men and Black women. And so we have been in this country systematically writing out communities for a very long time, and sometimes we're naming it and sometimes we are not. So this is not a new phenomena. What's new is the language, which is exactly what Brea, you were saying. But let me pass it to...
Listen, first of all, I'm about to shout, but
I was just about to say, I'm about to put the mic down and just sit at y'all's feet for a second,
because I'm like, this is my soul sister right here. Because at the end of the day, what we know is that this is a cycle of violence, right? It's state-sanctioned violence in a lot of ways, in the sense that we are being perpetuated upon by our own government in ways that we have seen time and time again. One of the things that we're talking about right now, and we had to really sit with as an organization, was should we even change our name? Because not because we're afraid, but because we don't want our people that we serve to be further targeted or impacted because we are taking a stand, right? And we're not the only ones having that, having that conversation or asking that question, because there are people whose names that you wouldn't even think would be alarming, Planned Parenthood or some of these other places where just the name alone creates an issue. But we think about that, and we sat down with SNCC. And we sat down with the SCLC. SNCC is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we sat down with people who started the Black Panther Party. And we sat down with people like Angela Davis and others who had to really come to terms with whether or not we fight what's in front of us, right? Or whether or not by standing where we are, or whether or not we decide that the shift is critical to save our people. But what is most important in this moment is that we know that we can research what happened before. And we are asking people to do a deep dive on what has happened before, because there are strategies that still work. And if we don't take the time to reach back and sort of study what some of these movements, the labor movements, have looked like, and how did they get the wins? If we don't study the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, if we don't study Stonewall, if we don't study some of these things that were in their day just as pressing and scary as what we're dealing with right now, they are banking on the fact that we will forget that we won in all of those things. Yeah. They'll forget that there was a way out in all of those things. And so we are asking people to really reach back. We're doing that work as well, as to say, listen, in your own community, that not just, you don't even have to look at a movement. How did your community manage certain things over time? Who were some of those voices? What were some of the policies and strategies that you were able to implement locally to help people? Because we might have to go back to some of those things. And the last thing I will say is that every conversation can't happen in public. So we were like, man, even with, if this is being live streamed, we got to be thoughtful about what we're saying, right? Every conversation cannot happen in public. And that even shouldn't be a partisan thing, because somebody said, they didn't even know Project 2025 was a thing. But Project 2025 has been written for the last 16 years, right? And so we also have to be having conversations that are decades long. We have to have our strategy, and our policy has to look beyond the moment, and really look at what we have historically endured, and the fact that we know that when we do get a little bit of power as working class people, as marginalized people, there's always pushback to that in this particular country. And so for that, we have to have a policy and a strategy that looks out 20, 30 years, just like, quite frankly, our adversaries.
Absolutely. And that requires being on the offense instead of only on the defense. I was having conversations with a few people, Nate from North Carolina, and we were talking about how sometimes not we in this room, I think that y'all are doing this a lot better, but there are people who call themselves on our side, but their strategy is to just point out how bad the opposition is and not develop something that people want to run towards, that people are excited by, to develop a vision of this is what you're fighting for and not just against. And so that's something that we're seeing, because as you said, whether it's named or not, whether they say it's neutral or not, it's not woke, it's not DEI, it's not critical, it's not ever the phrase, it's the work that you're doing. So whether you change the name or not, they're still going to find a way. And I mean, literally this administration was like, and if we see you change the name, we have an AI tracker that's going to still know that that's what you were doing before, and we're still going to get you. So changing the name instead of doubling down is not really the answer, but the answer is to learn from history and to build coalitions that can sustain in these moments. So to these historians, throwing it back to that, what does that answer look like? What does the coalition building look like, and how do we build solidarity and an intersectional analysis across these movements that allows for us to build something that people are excited about and not just fearful of? Because fear mongering is going to keep people closing their doors and windows, and it leads towards individualism. And I see that right now so bad. I see people fearing and saying, well, they took that man and his wife was 9 months pregnant, and I can't afford to be taken from my family, so I'm going to shut up and mind my business over here. And I can't afford to, so I'm going to take my pronouns out of my email signature. I mean, come on, people are doing this. And in the name of self-preservation, we are losing our numbers and our organization. So what is the answer so that we are not backtracking our way into a further defensive place where we can't get ourselves out of this hole?
So I think a couple of things, because we're talking to elected officials who have a position, right? It is aligning yourself with the people first so that they trust that you have their best interest at heart. And probably showing up in some non-traditional spaces right now, not necessarily looking as great as you do, because y'all look very great right now. And I'm sure some of you got a pair of tennis shoes in the car right now. Because people need to feel aligned and connected to leadership right now. And they need to understand that you understand what they have going on. The other component of this is we do a process or we have a tool that we use, and we call it a power mapping tool and a power building tool. And this is getting back to old school organizing, right? It's literally having people to sit down with themselves, their families, and literally figure out who are the people in my phone who, if something goes down tomorrow, I can call them and it's no questions asked. We've got each other. If I needed to raise $5,000 tomorrow, who can I call? And there's no questions asked. We got it. If we had to have a space or a building or a place to house people for a minute, where are the spaces and who do I call? And we got it. And we go through this process of power mapping with individuals. And what we found out, we just did this in Raleigh yesterday. I'm sorry, I don't know what city I'm in. Right. Yesterday, email is my co-founder and partner over at Wednesday. We just did this with about 40 people in the room. And in 1 hour, they realized that they had over $80,000 that they could raise in 24 hours. They realized that they had 26 free locations that they could house people in 24 hours. They realized that they had X amount of resources that they could all call. And these were individuals, they were not elected officials. These were parents, these were students, these were mothers, these were people who they've been told that their power doesn't look a certain kind of way because they don't hold a certain position. But when we help them to reimagine what power looks like and to realize that the resources that you have at your fingertips are also the way that you can save your community one day at a time, they left that room realizing that they could actually change Raleigh just with the 40 people that was in that room. And those are the kind of tools that we are helping people to reimagine and to use, to think through the safety that comes along with that. Because when you feel like, okay, I actually have somebody I can call. There's something that I can connect to, someone that I can connect to. It doesn't feel like you're fighting alone, because that individualism really is it is killing the collective, right? In our history, if we look at history, the only way you came over this stuff was collectively. You can't have a bus boycott with one person. You know, I mean, you can't, you can't do it. You have to have multiple people showing up. It doesn't mean that everybody agrees with each plan. And that's the other thing that we're having to help people think through, is that the goal is liberation. The goal is freedom. The goal is to save ourselves, is to save our communities. We can all agree on that. We don't have to always agree on all of the different strategies to get there, but we have to trust that everybody has the same goal. And that's why being in close proximity with each other right now is very important, so that we can all know that we're on the same goal, that we're reaching for the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so critical. And I think one of the things that I've learned in the policy research that I've been doing, which is really focused on how do we build a care economy? And that looks a lot of different ways. But one of the things that's been interesting, having gone into a couple of communities and done direct sort of education outreach in both North Carolina and Wisconsin, shouts out to the panel that was right before, is when you're in a room full of people who are of all ages, all races, all genders, and also all political affiliations, there's actually a lot more that those folks have in common than they think they do because of this moment in which we find ourselves. So if you ask a room full of people, for example, do you agree that if you work hard, you should be paid a fair wage? Everyone says, uh-huh. And so, okay, so we agree on policies like minimum wages. We agree that childcare is important. We agree that we should invest in our children. We agree that in elder care facilities, no one should be harmed bodily, right? And so we agree that if you're pregnant, you should get some time away to take care of giving birth and having a new child. We agree that if you get sick, you should not be penalized by missing a paycheck because you can't go to work that day. And I think that is something that COVID really taught us, is that, we actually need to think a little bit more about community health and well-being. And so going into these spaces, there's actually a lot more agreement in those rooms than we necessarily think that there is, which gives opportunity to push forward, whether it is a specific piece of policy like the Raise the Wage Act, or whether it is just an idea that we can build more solidarity than we think that we can, because folks do tend to agree on something when it comes down to sort of well-being.
Shout out to the programming folks for just curating this panel. I mean, they just spitting up here, and sometimes they talk and I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta ask another question. But y'all are so brilliant. And I love the two examples y'all gave, because in my head, I was actually thinking of the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We talked so much about a new normal. We built up mutual aid systems. People were delivering food to those who were elderly. People were making sure that people with immunocompromised, like we were showing up for each other in big ways, and we need that energy now. And this idea that we can wait out the next 2 to 4 years, as Mandela said, like we don't have 2 to 4 years to wait out. We have to be able to meet this moment by caring for our people. And even when you brought up the Montgomery bus boycott, and it can't just be one person, I think that's also important to name, because so many people want to be the person on the dais, but then people don't want to be the one carpooling and driving people so they can still get to work, making sure that people are not getting there sweaty and saying, you know what, I'm gonna get on the bus today. Like we have to be able, if we're asking people to take high stakes situations and take risk, we got to meet them there and say, but I'm going to mitigate some of that risk. And our job as elected officials is to move around resources and move around people and move around community members to meet different needs. You need this, but you have this to give. That person needs this, but has this to give. Let me link y'all together. And we have to be so much more imaginative than some of us have been. And we've just been in so many boxes. And I said I was going to be quoting a lot. So a quote, Tony Mubarak says, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible and to build that political imagination. And so selfishly, as a writer, as a culture worker, as a creative, I'm thinking of the ways that we can and should be working with culture workers better. Because let me tell you something, that is definitely something the right has figured out masterfully. I mean, I don't know how they dropped podcast mics like, I'm like, how y'all get that many mics out there? And they just saying stuff just to say stuff, no fact checking. They just doing whatever, but it's going viral. And like, where is our response to this cultural wave of toxic masculinity and of individualism and of you could be a billionaire too and all of it? Like, where is our answer to that? So as those who, I mean, neither of your organizations are formally creative organizations, but I think that both of you still see the value in storytellers. So talk to us about the role of storytellers in this moment and how the folks in this room maybe can and should be better working with storytellers to make this make sense to people, because I think right now people don't see a way out. And sometimes the 25-page policy document is not going to help people see the way out. We have to make it more vivid in a different way.
Okay, so we have the benefit of having been mentored by someone very great named Harry Belafonte, who in his life was one of the greatest humanitarians, but also one of the greatest activists and one of the greatest artists that we have ever seen, right? And one of the things that Mr. B would always tell us is that the agenda is to get an agenda. and you have to have everybody in the room. And so when he would bring us together, we would have artists in the room who could capture the moment and capture the spirit. We would have faith healers from different tribes. We would have people who could sing. We would have drummers. We would have all of that. And it put me in the mind of mass meetings, right? When you used to have mass meetings back in the day, it started with singing. It started with calling everyone in. It started with making sure that the spirit was right and all of those things. And we have to do that now. If there's no joy in this work, because just to be perfectly honest, nobody wants to just work and don't believe that it's possible. They need to be inspired by something. And sometimes, like you said, the issue that we're facing is not the inspiration, right? The inspiration is that something can be better. And we need to see that differently. And so we work with, artists like B. Mike, who are visual artists out of New Orleans. And we work with individuals who can take our pain and our passion and our hope and visualize that in a way that I will never be able to do. And, maybe you will never be able to do, but it's critical. We also believe that that's one of the best ways to utilize our local communities, right? How many of your communities have people that's on the, doing live music, once a week in the community, or doing, poetry nights, slams and things in the community, engaging those individuals who have audiences that you may not be connected to, but every week, I can think of 2 people in my city right now that every week they are pulling like 600 people into a room for 2 hours just doing music. And so they are a validator that, you may have never even thought of, right? And if you bring them into the space and allow them to help share the message of what we're trying to do, but align it with the art and the culture and the spirit, they can do that work on your behalf. And it also endears you in a way differently to the community, because they see that you are lifting things up that aren't normally lifted up, that you're creating room and creating spaces for things that are not normally there. And the last thing I will say on this component, I'm actually currently partnering with a number of organizations that are going around. It's called the State of the People Power Tour right now. And it's being led by Angela Rye and some other individuals. But even on this tour, we're going to different cities and asking people to reimagine and to think about what's possible. We know we need DJs. We need we gotta bring the energy in a different kind of way. And so we are not just showing up talking about policy. We're talking about what is your community known for? How do what are fans at? All those things that need to happen so people feel connected to something larger than just their pain. They want to be connected to something that is moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And also, so as someone who does write those 25-page reports, they do what they need to do, but that is not what the community needs. And it's also not necessarily the thing that is the most utilitarian when you're going out to try and explain to folks what you're working on. So you need both. You need to have the data. Okay, I'm delighted to provide it, but I also want to provide the narrative. And my narrative is not always as powerful as the story of the person in the community. So the story gathering piece is so crucial. One of the big pillars of Oxfam is from the local to the global. So and we mean that as people who are experiencing something on the ground, let's bring them somewhere, let's bring their voice. So recently I was at a convening of folks where we brought folks in from Syria to talk about what's going on the ground. But even a couple years ago during COVID, when we were doing much more research on childcare, we were bringing a woman named Rochelle Wilcox from New Orleans, who created her own childcare provider system for the community, doing incredible work to really highlight what does that look like when you are in community, providing community creating job opportunities, but also this is what care looks like. So shouts out to New Orleans, shouts out to B. Mike for sure. But we know that the reports are one thing, but if you don't have the story, if you don't have the lived experience, but especially if you don't have the joy, then you're going to lose people's attention.
So deep. And thank you for bringing Mr. Belafonte's name into the space. Shout out to the Gathering for Justice and Carmen Perez Jordan, who's keeping that legacy alive. Yes. But as you both said, we absolutely need the both and. It's not the either or. And actually, State of Our People tour is doing that. They have 20-page policy documents under various different issues. I was asked to write the policy document around Black agriculture and Black farmers, but the way that it's being transmitted and distributed and disseminated is through the mouths of artists. And I think we need to get more creative in making that real. so that people are not just showing up and saying, oh, I just hate Trump, so I'm going to come here and vote. But like, I'm excited about this ballot initiative that my community has. I'm excited about this, what this new city council member is bringing forward. I'm excited to not just vote them in, but to continue to show up and make sure that we can make those things actually happen. And that's what gives us something to run towards. So in the spirit of running towards, I don't want us to only talk about the negative. What is giving you hope? What are you seeing? Who are you seeing who's just doing this in ways that you're like, yes, if more of us were doing it like this, we'd have the movement that we're dreaming about, and that you just want to big up and give love to in this moment.
I would love to just take a minute for one of the partner organizations that we work with is the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And they do some of the most incredible work. And they are really demonstrating what it looks like when you organize at the local level and then you make change at the city and then at the state, and there's a federal bill, right? And this is an example of where women brought themselves together, immigrant workers, women from all over the United States. And now there's an international arm to really ask for change, and it's working. And so the thing that's keeping me really hopeful is where we see examples of positive change at the local level that are being held up as models for what change can look like at the state or at the federal level. And we show how it is working. But it is the opportunity to also, again, highlight the voices of these women that are organizing themselves, that are demonstrating sectoral bargaining, that are demonstrating what it can do. So I really want to give a shout out to the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is doing some incredible work. And there are many other amazing organizations that we can point to, but that is one where I see so much movement. And it seems like every single year there's a new state that has its own domestic workers bill of rights, which is all thanks to their organizing.
And there's so many people who are doing good. I want to start because of the room that we're in. What's really making me happy is to see people find their voice as elected officials right now and stand for something. So for every one of you who said or stood for something, particularly in the last 100 days, I want to tell you that you are exactly what we need. And you are the hope that a lot of people, when they sent you to office, that this was what they were believing in, right? They were believing that you would have a backbone. They were believing that you would stand for what was right. They were believing that you would stand on behalf of the people. And when they're seeing that, it is actually saving them a little bit at a time. So shout outs to you and those of you who have stood on the front line. There were quite a few people last night that were on the panel who've been doing that, who've been putting, their quite frankly, their bodies on the line for this work. So I'll start there because leadership is an example, right? It has to be, servant leadership is critical, right? And we can't ask people to do what we're not doing. So for those of you who are in this room, you're in this room because you're likely already doing this work. And so we appreciate that. Some of the other things that are bringing me hope is just the amount of pushback from young people. I mean, they coming from a city, I'm from Birmingham, as I said, who this Saturday we will be commemorating the 62nd Children's March in Birmingham Crusade. And what that was essentially what was happening is that you had families who were organizing and they were protesting and they were pushing back against the lack of workers' rights and also the lack of the things that were going on with them with Jim Crow and all of these and segregation and all these other things. And what was happening is that the pushback was so visceral, the adults were losing their jobs and they were losing opportunities and they were getting ready to stop it and call it off because they were at the point now where they couldn't take care of their families, right? So many people had been affected. And so there was a conversation and there were students in the room, and I'm talking about as young as 9, right, in the room, and they decided that they would step up. And so you had one of the largest student crusades to ever happen with over 5,000 young people walking out of high school, middle school, and elementary school on that day to protest what was going on. So we are seeing students relive that moment right now. We are seeing young people walk out of classrooms, and not just classrooms, walk out of jobs, walk out of different places because they have connected to something which is ancestral, which is powerful, which is divine. And they realize that they have a voice in this moment. They realize that they have position in this moment. And we have to wrap our arms around that. We cannot be afraid of that. We have to call them, into spaces that we haven't necessarily always made room for them so that their energy, their power, their fearlessness, quite frankly, frankly, can rub off on some of us,
Yeah.
but also they have strategies and they're ready to organize in ways that perhaps some of us cannot do. We talk a lot about in our organization that there's room for everybody to play a part. I can't go to jail. If I go to jail, a lot of things get impacted, but we definitely need people who are willing to do what's necessary, right? And so every single person that, we talk to, we ask them to figure out what is your part, what can you play, what are you willing to risk, right? What are you willing to sacrifice? And once you make that determination for yourself, we figure out our strategy together. And so these young people, I promise you, please don't miss the opportunity to bring them into a space, to allow them to hear the policy, to read the papers, but also respond in a way that feels responsible for them right now, that feels right for them. And you'll be surprised, they'll do some of the stuff that you can't do yourself.
Right.
And that's important too.
Yes. And I just love that you brought that example up, and I'm gonna have to talk to you after about that commemoration because I want to be a part of it. But what was also powerful about that Children's March moment was that when the children stood up and said they were going to do it, Dr. King actually told them no at first. He's like, I'm not putting kids on the front line. They're bringing out hoses and dogs. I can't in good conscience. They said, we're not asking for permission.
Right.
We're going to do it with or without you. We love your advice and your insight and for you, but we're going to do this with or without you. And those young people, and we see that happening now, young people who are standing up on issues that matter deeply to them, risking having college degrees rescinded, risking having no jobs when they come out of college, risking misdemeanor and felony charges for encampments on their campuses. Like, students are really protesting, talking about divestment and reinvestment, and like, what does it look like for us to be vehicles and support systems and in community? And I just think that it's so powerful, and there, it shows that the innovation is there, the fearlessness, as you said, is there, the willingness to fight is there. And I think there are so many people right now who are like, I want you to match my fearlessness. I want you to match my fight. I want you to match my urgency. I want people in office who are going to act like my life is on the line, because my life is on the line. And so I'm excited for us to leave this room better than we came into it, for us to go out there and say, you're right, my constituents cannot wait 4 years. They can't afford for the only thing I get done is to be platitudes and a really great speech. They need something tangible to happen for us, by us. And if I can't make it happen, I got to do everything in my power so that they know I was willing to put it on the line as well. So I could sit here and listen to y'all and ask y'all questions all day. I want to throw it to the audience and make sure that we have time for questions. But if there's not, I'm gonna come back and ask y'all some more. So we'll get a mic going in a little bit. But if you have questions, can we get hands up so that we know where the mics are going to? Okay, I see one over here. The light is in my eyes. Okay, one there. Okay, cool. So we're going to bring some mics around and make sure that y'all can get asked questions. But thank y'all for your brilliance.
Can I ask, I have a kind of two things. Is it okay if I do two? Okay. So my first question, because I loved where the conversation was starting at first, and you are talking about kind of that data collection piece. And let me find my notes again. So first, how do you create your own data? We talked about creating your own data. How do you do that while also addressing kind of public distrust and people like, I'm from a very rural, small town, majority African American. People don't necessarily trust you asking them certain information and trying to get them in that space. How do you do that in a way that's still respectful, but also gets to the meat of what you're trying to get? And then kind of caveat in that as well, do you have any suggested like free resources to collect that data?
That's a great question. So first of all, let me just say, one of the things that we need to be really, really careful with when we're using any type of data set is to recognize the limitations of it. And especially when we're talking census, like there's a lot of limitations here that we have to always sort of, caveat and disclaim the work, because it does tend to exclude, or it is missing the voices of communities like what you're identifying, right? And so one of the partner organizations that we work with is this organization called Farm Worker Justice, which works with a huge number of immigrant workers that are documented and undocumented, who are all over the country, though this organization started in California. And it is about showing up every day and building that trust, so that if I want to know data about like what is the demographics of farm workers in a certain space, I'm not necessarily going to go to the US Department of Ag. flag, I'm probably going to go to farm worker justice and say, okay, what are we seeing? You know, what is the sample size that you're looking at? What is that breakdown, so that I get a better sense of this is probably more likely. But the reason that that is really solid data is because we're talking about years of trust building and showing up on work sites and really demonstrating that, like, you can trust me. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to provide resources as much as possible. And then in terms of, like, are there good resources for data collecting? There's a lot of organizations that do more, I don't want to call it polling, I would say more survey work that have sample surveys. That's not something that we at Oxfam do that much of, but that is something that other organizations definitely do. So let's connect so that hopefully I can give you some resources. But you know, at the end of the day, and this is silly, but like, Excel is your best friend.
I mean, I was just about
You
to
feel
say,
me? And I know that's simple, but like, we love Microsoft Excel.
good
And if you
about-
want to get real nerdy with it, then R is a great data set. Like, it is we
That's
get
true.
coding with it. It's nerdy, but we out here.
I love the way everyone's like,
right.
yes,
Yeah,
me too, I'm nerdy
Like,
too. me
yeah,
too.
like I know who the people would be. I see you all.
Are we answering both questions? Okay. So a couple of things. One, I will say that we have to be careful because a lot of our people are tired of being surveyed and not seeing a response. So if you are trying to build data in this moment, make sure that you have used the data that you've already had, and be ready to respond to people about what you use, or like what came from that data, right? So that's first. The second thing is that we are asking people, when you think about smaller places, we have neighborhood presidents, we have data sets that don't necessarily rise to the level of some of these more, I would say, larger platforms. And so in Birmingham, we have 99 neighborhoods. And in those neighborhoods, we have 23 different communities. And so we have a running list of how many people are actually working and volunteering in that community. I would start by creating a conversation with all 99 of my neighborhoods, right? And starting to develop that tool for ourselves. Working with local schools that are innovative and that have technology is another way of bringing, you know, those students into the space to help you build the technology, and that you also know like what their goals are behind it, what their spirit is behind it, because whoever builds the data and whoever builds the tech is just as important as the information that's going into it. So that's how you can also build trust, by saying, here's who's building it, here's why we are building it, here's how we're going to use the data once you give it to us, and we want you to go along with us through the process. As long as it's transparent, you should be able to get people to, especially if you are coming with a message of, I know that we've already asked you this, but here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I need you to do, and here's what we can do together. If you can land there, people will still respond to it, but it cannot feel like just another survey that most of our communities get every year, right, to ask something.
And I know I'm not a panelist, but I do want to add on to this because I have run into this issue, especially in rural Black communities. And I will also say that part of the transparency is understanding the fear. And like some people are like, oh, I get it, but like really understanding the fear to the point where you have done enough research to have answers to very valid questions. So you might have a really great intention for how you're using the data, but knowing where and how the data is being stored, who might have access to it, whether you shared with them or not. And so like what cloud is it on and all of that, like those are important questions to answer, especially for those who are nervous about technology already, who are fearful of, well, I don't want my number to show up on somebody else's, you know, and those are real fears, that the information they give you can and will be used against them in the court of law. To, you know, and so being aware of the fear, knowing what has happened with people's data in the past and how you are taking efforts to avoid it, or saying, listen, I can't avoid it. No matter where we put it, it's going to be on somebody's cloud, but we have taken as many, you know, precautions as possible to protect it in these ways and blah, blah, blah. And then, as you said, being clear with how you're going to use it. And I think especially because you had mentioned earlier in your introduction, like your work with USDA. And so being really mindful of like what the pain points and tension points might be with people you represent. And so you might have their trust, but then making sure that they understand what the institution's going to do with or without your permission, it does really matter. Because I think even if the answer is not, there is a 0% chance this will be used against you, I think people will feel better knowing that you actually did the work to dig versus when, like I think that came up a lot with census research.
right.
People are like, tell your people to fill it
Right.
out. And it's like, well,
For what?
you want to tell people
Yeah.
to fill it out constantly,
Yeah.
but you're not mentioning that a lot of people can access this data.
A lot of
And that does get used against people in
Yeah.
different instances. And so warn people about the potential pitfalls and let them know that the potential windfalls are
Yeah.
worth that risk if that's what it is. But I think that transparency is also acknowledging where I can't fix everything, I can't patch every
That's
hole,
right.
but it's worth it because we're going to do this with it. We're trying to make a case for this industry coming in. That's
right.
going to create new jobs,
That's
but
right.
without the data, they don't want to hear my pitch.
That's right.
And like, that's the kind of, like, you got to make that plain
Yeah.
to some folks and let them know,
Yeah.
and be willing to level with the fact that some people won't. Like, I was working with a Black man from Duke who was trying to do research with Black farmers. He's like, I thought people would trust me. And it's like, it's not you, it's Duke.
Right.
they trust you, it's Duke. So being willing to level with that and account for that in the data.
Thank you. Oh.
I love the North Carolina miss on this panel and for y'all coming. Thank y'all for doing that. I guess my question, because I'm coming from the state party perspective of this, how often do you do or do you in your organizations that do the power mapping before party entities? Because I think, to be honest with you, that is what I find to be the most mishap, is sort of all of my different entities are out there, on the hard side at least, are sort of out there with their own instead of pulling it together. And I do believe it is the job of a state party to be able to do that. I think that sometimes you have competing priorities coming in from a national perspective, or even your party is trying to battle it out with your caucuses or just the different sort of areas. But is there anybody that you would recommend doing what you did in Durham with our regular community folks who just we are party?
Right. So in terms of woke vote, we would not be the organization that would do that with a party. We have created a safe space with our voters, knowing that the work that we are doing, bless you, and the way in which we are bringing them into the space is not aligned with any party or candidate. And that's important for them because they need to feel like their power is beyond an election cycle. But in terms of my other hat, which is Black Equity, and there are other firms who work with entities to help. And what we call that is with listening, right? To come in and do listening sessions and help you all figure out where the gaps are, where are the missed opportunities, but also where's the synergy, right? And a lot of times if you can't do it, you probably aren't having the best opportunity or best moving forward with the best way, because they see you as a part of, maybe you're going to be on one person's side or somebody's going to be on another person's side. So bringing in a mediator that's saying, I'm not on anybody's side, I'm just trying to figure out what the information is. We're trying to make sure that you hear each other. That's the best way to do that. And there's plenty of firms that I can, once this is over, I can tell you who does that. But I will say that power mapping, that tool is critical primarily because it allows people to know what's possible, but also it shows what our limitations are, right? And it's important for us to know that as well. And I think that speaks back to the question that our brother had earlier, is that we have to be honest in what we cannot do. Because if we say we can do all things and then we don't have any wins to show for it, we lose credibility. And so we have to figure out a way to lift up the small wins, and that's what power mapping helps to do.
Nothing to add.
All right, we have time for one last question over
Hi,
here.
thank you so much. Yeah. It's the civil rights moment,
Democracy.
watershed moment. So I'm wondering if y'all have any thoughts or experiences on making off-ramps for folks who may have voted for Trump and now are feeling some regret or feeling like they were misled in doing that. And, I felt anger after the last election, but I feel like that's an important part of the work right now in making off-ramps.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is necessarily an off-ramp, but I do think it is. So in my own research, which again is very, very focused on low-wage working families, labor rights, it is just asking folks what's missing. And asking, one of the things that I did when I went into the small town in North Carolina and I went into a small town in Wisconsin, I just asked everyone, what makes a good job? Can you tell me what you're looking for? And every single thing that they listed was a policy that I'm tracking at the state level for all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico. And so it's just meeting them in that moment and saying, okay, it's not coming in with, you're voting X or Y way as a result of this vote. This is missing for you. It is more, what do you wish? What are you wishing for? And here are ways in which we can fulfill the wish. Here are ways in which we can make that a reality. I think paid leave is an easy example of that. Minimum wages is an easy example of that, of like, I hear you that you really want to be making more money. I'm not even going to talk to you about like how we were voting or what we did last. I'm going to instead talk to you about all the possibilities that we can move forward to make it happen. Let's talk about ballot initiatives. Let's talk about this, that, the other. So it's trying to just seek what can we build together as opposed to let's be angry at one another.
Right. I would just say to that, it's a question of values at this point. Like now you realize that you are, thinking about this differently and you want to find community. And in that we can have real conversations. You cannot get to okay if you're not having real conversations, right? So I would think whatever places that you're curating, they should be safe spaces where people can say, hey, I voted this way, and now I'm having trouble with the fact that I did that. And that in that space, they can say that and not be attacked, right? But they can also be in that space and hear from somebody that, the fact that you voted that way makes me uncomfortable, right? We need to create spaces that allow people to have real conversations. And after they have the conversation, you need to be ready to lean them into real solutions and real strategies and real paths to move forward. And so you can't dismiss anybody's actual experience, right? Or how they were impacted by the experience. What you can say is, let's hear it, let's respect it, and then here's what we're going to do as we're moving forward in this space. But there's some work that folk got to do on their own too, right? Yeah. And so we want to encourage people to get, have conversations with themselves, be honest with themselves about what they care about, what they value, and what they want moving forward, and have that conversation both at home and then once they come into community.
And just to co-sign that, I think not every organization can be an off-ramp, and that's okay to say, because ultimately some space, like, listen, this has to be a safe space for people who've been impacted, and we can't have them hold the emotional labor for people who are just getting that. But there are organizations really dedicated to that. And so just to name organizations that I think are really great off-ramps, Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, is a really great one. They also have local chapters that often go by White People for Black Lives. I think those are really great off-ramps for white folks who are coming out of that and kind of need a little de-radicalization, because they hold circles and spaces where people can be heard in almost what feels like an AA type meeting. Where you can, and listen, I hear the snickers, but it's true. Like, you need a space where it's like, I can be honest about what I was doing that wasn't serving me or the people around me, without seasoned Black organizers needing to be like, that's okay. Like, no, like, it has to happen with someone who said, you know what, that was me 6 years ago. And I'm not too far removed from it to stand on a pedestal and act like I'm better, like I know what it's like to be there. I think also recognizing that not all of these people who need off-ramps are white. Like, I think there's also going to be a reality for that. I can say this as someone who is a queer Black woman, but who's raised in the Black church. There was off-ramps that I needed to learn around things that I had internalized around gender and sexuality because of the church environment that I came from. And it wasn't going to put that on people who didn't have capacity for that to do, but like, someone had to make space for me. And so now there are certain conversations that I can have space for someone else, because I know what it's like to have internalized homophobia. I know what it's like to be dealing with things that someone else put on you, and welcome, because the tent doesn't get bigger if no one's willing to extend the invite. But I think we also have to be willing to set a standard of, the off-ramp does not mean you can just come in here and say and do anything, and you get to have a leadership position and all of this other stuff. The off-ramp means there is some political education you got to go through. There are some trainings you've got to push through. And the off-ramps have to be intentional with people who are trained. So I would say transformative justice circles and spaces are also really great off-ramps, which are also very hyper-localized, and can focus on the specific why, because not everyone is off-ramping for the same reasons. Some people are off-ramping and still have a lot of those harmful ideologies, and they're saying, well, I lost a job, so I want to come off the Trump train, but that doesn't mean that they are a safe person to be around. Right, exactly, that they share values. So we need to still have a standard. And I think the last thing I'll say is a great historical example of this for me is a Fred Hampton, who was the chairman of the Chicago Black Panther Party. And at the time, there were some people like, well, I don't like that. He would work with self-proclaimed people who were self-identified as rednecks. He would work with people who were using Confederate flag memorabilia. He would walk into their meetings, but he wasn't gonna say, I'm gonna excuse the racism just so that I can have more numbers at my rally. I'm going to push you to have a class analysis that also accounts for race. And once we get there, now let's organize together. And I'm willing to work together to get there. So we also do need to still hold the standards as we build the off-ramps. So that was the last question. I am so sorry. They did tell me that right before we took it. So thank you so much. I'm sure that our brilliant panelists will be around and available to talk to anyone, especially about those specific data questions and firms that are doing that power mapping. Oxfam does have a table outside, so you can also talk more and hear about Dr. Caitlin's work. But please give a huge round of applause for Dawana and Caitlin. Thank you so, so much for being here.
Let's please give a huge round of applause for our moderator as well.